The word of the Lord came to Joel, son of Pethuel. Hear this, all you elders. Listen, all who live in the land. Has anything like this ever happened in your days, or in the days of your ancestors? Tell it to your children, and let your children tell it to their children, and their children to the next generation. What the locust swarm has left, the great locusts have eaten. What the great locusts have left, the young locusts have eaten. What the young locusts have left, the other locusts have eaten. Wake up, you drunkards, and weep. Wail, all you drinkers of wine. Wail because of the new wine, for it has been snatched from your lips. A nation has invaded my land, a mighty army without number. It has the teeth of a lion and fangs of a lioness. It has laid waste my vines and ruined my fig trees. It has stripped off their bark and thrown it away, leaving their branches white. Mourn like a virgin in sackcloth, grieving for the betrothed of her youth. Grain offerings and drink offerings are cut off from the hand of the Lord. The priests are in mourning, all those who minister before the Lord. The fields are ruined, the ground is dried up, the grain is destroyed, the new wine is dried up, the oil fails. Despair, you farmers, wail, you vine growers, grieve for the wheat and barley, because the harvest of the field is destroyed. The vine is dried up, and the fig tree is withered. The pomegranate, the palm, and the apple tree, all the trees of the field are dried up. Surely the people's joy has withered away. Put on sackcloth, you priests, and mourn. Wail, you who minister before the altar. Come, spend the night in sackcloth, you who minister before my God. For the grain offerings and drink offerings are withheld from the house of your God. Declare a holy fast, call a sacred assembly, summon the elders, all who live in the land, to the house of the Lord your God, and cry out to the Lord. Alas for the day of the Lord is near. It will come like destruction from the Almighty. Has not the food been cut off before our very eyes? Joy and gladness from the house of the Lord? The seeds are shriveled beneath the clods. The storehouses are in ruins. The granaries have been broken down, for the grain has dried up. How the cattle moan. The herds mill about because they have no pasture. Even the flocks of sheep are suffering. To you, O Lord, I call. For fire has devoured the pastures in the wilderness, and flames have burned up all the trees of the field. Even the wild animals pant for you. The streams of water have dried up, and fire has devoured the pastures in the wilderness. The emotions of Joel have never felt more apt. We hear of a nation in mourning, of livelihood stripped away, of unprecedented catastrophe, of an uncountable enemy no one can see or fight. And we cry out, as the people in Joel's day did, surely the people's joy is withered away. We first hear about this catastrophe like a whisper. Hear this, hear this, hear this. It's important. Pass it on, pass it on, pass it on. Pass it on to your children, to their children, to their children's children. Pay attention, Joel seems to be saying. And this isn't in the way that our news cycle says, pay attention. No, this is the word of the Lord. It's a message from God. Like us, this is a once-in-a-lifetime event, momentous. But unlike us, Joel's message is that this event points to something bigger, something eternal. So what has happened to Joel? Well, the locusts have invaded. as an army, unseen, uncountable, devastating a land. I think it's fair to say that Israel at this point in time was fairly prosperous. They had grain and new wine, olive oil, all that they needed to survive and to worship God. Perhaps they even counted on it, trusted in it. And now suddenly their security, their prosperity is stripped away. What do they do now? And it can feel like that for us, can't it? And the things that we relied on, our security, our stability, they're gone, and we're all wondering, what happens now? And Joel gives us two responses. The first is mourning. We see in Joel these three pictures of mourning. The first is in verse 8, mourning like a virgin in sackcloth, grieving for the betrothed of her youth. This is a picture of mourning over loss. There is the obvious, immediate loss of the loved one, the betrothed. But there is also another loss behind it. In these times in Israel, it would have been hard for an unmarried woman. And this virgin would not be able to get married. She is grieving the loss of a secure future, the future as she thought it would be. One thing this crisis has taught me is how much we rely on these stories. Whether it's as simple as tomorrow we'll go shopping, or as big as next month we'll move house. We are grieving over the loss of our loved ones and the loss of our futures. And Joel says it's right to mourn and to grieve. Second, we see the picture in verses 11 and 12 of the farmers and labourers. Their despair is over the loss of their crops, their livelihood. How will they provide for their family? More than that, how will they have seed for next year's crop? And again, these questions feel very real and very relevant right now. What do we do in this unstable economic climate? What will next year, even next month, look like? And finally, we see the priests. Their mourning is severe. They have no more grain and no more oil to offer as sacrifice to God, to worship him as they ought. Instead, they are called to worship God empty-handed, just as they are, to mourn in sackcloth before him. You see, in the Bible, mourning is more than just sadness and sorrow. It implies a turning back to God in repentance and worship. Which brings us to our final response. We are to return to God. Joel's response is to fall down on his knees before the Lord. To you, O Lord, I call, he says. And the Lord answers him. In chapter 2, verse 12, even now, he says, return to me with all your heart, with fasting and weeping and mourning. The Lord knows our tears, our mourning, and he longs that mourning would lead us to him in wholehearted worship. We have nothing to bring, like those priests before the altar, nothing that we could offer. But as the song says, your grace has found me just as I am, empty-handed, but alive in your hands. Our response to catastrophe, to disaster, to mourn what we have lost, to bring it before the God who cares, and to turn to him in repentance and joyful worship.